An incident occurred on the Blazing Saddles set in 1974, but no one ever mentions it. After just one day on the set, the actor portraying the Waco Kid vanished. Hollywood is still haunted by what he did even after all these years. Upon reading the script, John Wayne spoke the fateful three words. Warner Brothers buried the original title's reference to Malcolm X. Not only that, but only historians from France can decipher the hidden meaning of the governor's name. This is more than simply movie trivia. They attempted to conceal these details for half a century. It all started with a crazy notion at Blazing Saddles, an homage to Malcolm X. It was previously known as Tex X. Creator Andrew Bergman, who was in his 20s at the time, had an idea for a film about a black sheriff in a predominantly white western town. It was a bombshell in and of itself. The sheriff's appointment in Malcolm X's honor was no laughing matter. It was an assertion. He aspired to dismantle the pristine, idealized portrayal of cowboys in Hollywood films. The Old West was ruled by a black man? The entire genre was turned on its head by it. To make matters worse, a big studio gave this screenplay significant consideration in the early 1970s. During that time, films largely avoided discussing race, particularly in a comedic context. The final version of Blazing Saddles retained the fire, but deleted the moniker Tex X. It was almost like the picture took a whole different turn before Mel Brooks stepped up. James Earl Jones was supposed to play the sheriff, and Alan Arkin was supposed to direct. Before he became Darth Vader's voice actor, he did this. There was depth and strength about Jones, but no experience in the field of humor. Despite being a solid choice, the project fell through. Everyone was on edge due to creative disagreements, anxious executives, and the script's directness. It remained on a shelf because it was too daring and maybe harmful. The narrative really took off after Mel Brooks was involved. He left it undiluted. He continued to push it farther. Blazing Saddles as we know it would not exist if that earlier disaster had not occurred. When Mel Brooks accepted the position, he wasn't exactly flying high. Despite the producer's Oscar, the film was a financial disaster. Next, he had the disastrous The 12 Chairs. He had no money. Even a new automobile was out of his price range. Anne Bancroft was expecting their first child with him. Giving up and going back to watching TV was his plan B. He refused the Tex X offer because he had faith in his abilities. His desperation led him to accept it. Brooks later said that this picture was his savior. He was able to buy a house, have a good meal, and get his breath back because of it. His entire life changed as he wrote A Blazing Saddle. Writing the screenplay was utter mayhem. It wasn't just Brooks who worked. He recruited 4 other authors, Alan Iger, Norman Steinberg, Richard Pryor, and Andrew Bergman. A bar brawl broke out in the writing room. We continued our sessions far into the night. It was Chinese food and adrenaline that kept them going. There were 412 pages in the initial draft. You could film for about 8 hours with it. The last 275 pages are still far too lengthy, but they are jam-packed with outrageous rule-breaking humor. With the writing, Pryor added his razor's edge, particularly with relation to Mongo. Even now, no one knows who wrote what. The scenario where people fart around the campfire, that resulted from this insanity. It wasn't prose. We were at war. What came out of that was really unprecedented in Hollywood. With a wall placard, Brooks established the mood right away. Kindly refrain from penning an amicable script, it read. Everything was molded by the symbol. His order was to disregard all regulations. Everything was fair game. He had straightforward ideas. Since they are unlikely to succeed anyhow, let's have fun nonetheless. They succeeded. They were the first to dare to make light of taboo topics, parody Hollywood cliches, and bigotry. Pryor penned jokes on Jews. Jewish authors penned obscene humor. No one maintained a steady lane. The film's bold tone came from this combination. The film poked fun at more than simply westerns. From their ruins, something new was fashioned. The original plan was to have Richard Pryor star. Sheriff Bart was most strongly recommended by Brooks. It was rejected by Warner Brothers. He was deemed uninsurable, they stated, due to Pryor's history of drug problems and his arrest. Anger consumed Brooks. It crossed his mind to just leave. But Pryor, who was remarkably composed, warned him against it. He promised to locate the proper person. Keep going, B. On the other hand, Pryor remained. He became an integral part of the screenplay and had an unseen hand in shaping the film's tone. The primary role was given to Clevin Little. In retrospect, Brooks said they struck it rich with Little. Pryor and Gene Wilder became a famous comedic pair only 2 years after this, so it's hard not to imagine what their performance would have been like. Then the greatest shock of all occurred. Actor John Wayne was Mel Brooks's first choice to play Waco Kid. The John Wayne, that is correct. Among the world's most famous celebrities he remained. He received the script from Brooks. Wayne stated he laughed himself silly after reading it the night before. He declined, though. It was too unclean, he added, to reflect well on him. Even still, he insisted on being the first in line to view it. Try to picture it. The most sober cowboy of all time, portraying a drunk in a film that makes fun of his whole genre. That was close, but it never materialized. Following Wayne's rejection, Brooks became fixated on the idea of starring Dan Daly. Daly wasn't your typical Westerner. Although he was most recognized for his musical performances, he was also an exceptional horseman. In Brooks's mind, he would be ideal. He went so far as to locate him in Hawaii. The script was perfect for Daly, but he also declined. He was losing vision. He claimed he could no longer bike safely due to his near blindness, a crushing blow to Brooks. Unfortunately, destiny had other ideas for him and the ideal actor. After that, the most disastrous casting call ever occurred. Gig Young was employed by Brooks. Although Young possessed the worn-out appearance that Brooks desired and had won an Oscar, he struggled with a severe drinking problem. He began to tremble during the jail cell scene on the very first day of production. Brooks believed he was playing a role. He was taken to the hospital in a hurry till he vomited green bile. Not casting an alcoholic is the way to get an alcoholic, Brooks stated afterwards. Youth never returned. He proceeded to sue Warner Brothers. Another Waco Kid had slipped away from the picture. At that point, Gene Wilder became involved. Even for the Waco Kid, Brooks hadn't thought of him. He felt Wilder was too inexperienced and youthful. Earlier, he had extended an offer to Wilder to play the villain, but Wilder had declined. Now Brooks called him, her voice filled with desperation. On the producers, Wilder and Brooks had recently wrapped off their collaboration. He immediately boarded a plane and headed for Los Angeles. It was as if the costume had been tailored to his every curve. It was Monday, and he had already arrived on set. The subtle charisma and unusual timing of the Waco Kid made him an iconic figure. His on-screen connection with Clevin Little was the film's driving force. That last-minute casting was the linchpin that kept everything together among the mayhem. Mel Brooks's initial screening of Blazing Saddles for Warner Brothers upper management was a flop. A hush fell over the room. There was not a single boss who grinned. Fart jokes, a sequence where a horse is punched, and the unabashed usage of the N-word were all included in the picture. A sense of unease and subsequent indignation replaced the laughing. The head of domestic distribution at the studio, Leo Greenfield, came out and suggested they should just dump the picture and suffer the financial consequences. A number of people were in agreement. It wasn't simply that they didn't enjoy the film. Destroyed was their desire. They gave Brooks a lengthy list of layoffs. Eliminate the insults, cut out the violent sequence, and eliminate the campfire scene. After a courteous listen, Brooks respectfully accepted the list, exited the room, and tossed it aside after crumpling it. Nothing would change because of him. Down to his last shot, Brooks was well aware. Not long after, he set up a second screening, this time for the employees, secretaries, janitors, and mailroom guys, rather than the suits. Once again, the room went boom. People started giggling excessively as soon as the first joke was spoken. Some of them even lost their balance and fell out of their seats from gasping for oxygen. In a good way, it was total mayhem. Norman Steinberg, one of the writers, had a clear memory of the event. Individuals were reportedly squatting on the floor, according to him. As it all happened, Brooks expressed his true feelings. This film belongs to us fidum. Something the studio executives couldn't ignore was seen that night. It was a huge hit with actual crowds, regular people. The film almost avoided oblivion because of that. Apprehension persisted in the studio even following that irrational reaction. They took precautions because they were afraid of a countrywide release. Just 3 cities would host Blazing Saddles: the Big Apple, Hollywood, and Chicago. I'm done. Nothing except cold releases to find out what happened. No ads, no critic previews, and little hype. The rationale behind selecting these places was the higher likelihood that its residents would appreciate the humor, particularly the Jewish Catskill-style comedy that Brooks was known for. Just enough to avoid embarrassment, the studio was hoping for modest box office returns. Instead, they were met by overflowing cinemas filled with laughing and squeals of delight, coupled with virally disseminated word of mouth. The dice had turned and the conflagration was only beginning. Many critics were perplexed by it. It was well received by some. A number of people found it insulting and vulgar. Yet it was all for naught. Regular crowds continued to gather. The picture was screening in theaters across the country by the spring of 1974. Surprisingly, suburban theaters were selling out tickets even though the studio had anticipated little audience. Blazing Saddles wasn't the only show that people watched. People discussed, disputed, and cited it. The block was encircled by lines. Friends and family members became nights out of it. What began as a small-scale comedy quickly became a phenomenon on a national scale. Not even the most critical critics could deny it. Everyone was screaming, "Eat quo." No one had anticipated that the film's controversial moments would be able to pass muster, yet it had succeeded in doing so. Next, the funds arrived. The final North American gross, $119.6 million, despite a budget of just $2.6 million. As a result, it was crowned 1974's top picture. Four's top picture. Approximately 63 million people saw it in cinemas. Compared to subsequent Lord of the Rings films, that is rather impressive. Blazing Saddles made around $600 million after accounting for inflation. A success it was not. It was amazing. By going with his instincts and ignoring the studio brass, Mel Brooks was able to create the film he always imagined for himself. It was effective. Keeping the film alive wasn't enough. It changed the game for comedic writing. The layers of significance in Blazing Saddles extended to even the tiniest elements. William J. Lepetoumane is the name of the governor. I find that completely nonsensical, albeit it alludes to a genuine French musician by the name of Joseph Pujol, a worldwide celebrity known as Lepetoumane, which translates to the fart maniac. Pujol was born in 1857. He performed entirely under that alias. He possessed the remarkable ability to inhale air or even water into his rectum and exhale it in perfect harmony, punctually and rhythmically. Even though he could only use his rear end to light a cigarette, he could play music, blow out candles, and do impressions. There were to be medics on hand at Pujol performances in case somebody passed out from laughing too hard. Such was his popularity. He supposedly made more than France's most renowned actress when someone died laughing. It wasn't for fun that Brooks named the governor after him. An icon of physical comedy who had once presided over the Moulin Rouge was honored in this way. And that wasn't all that Brooks did. He went beyond playing the role of governor. A Native American chief who was proficient in Yiddish was another character he performed. One of the most ridiculous parts of the film occurs when the chief allows a group of African American settlers to pass by unharmed and then makes a joke that contradicts every cliché in the Hollywood Western genre. "Do not go insane," he adds in Yiddish. "Release him. Assuming you're in good health, they're darker than us." It was ridiculous. It was insulting. It was intentional, too. Native American actors were frequently Jewish in bygone days. Only those well-versed in Jewish culture and the history of Hollywood casting could possibly understand Brooks's script flip and the joke's multiple layers. The acting was just the beginning for Brooks. He voiced characters in unexpected scenes. Lily Von Stupp's backup singers? There he is. That bystander who interrupted the last bout. He too. Subtly but surely, he adorned the soundtrack with miniature versions of himself. It was hilarity amplified. Astounding humor fills every frame. Everything sounded as ridiculous as possible. And he threw himself into it even more when something defied storytelling conventions. The film's intentional use of period details is the best example of this. The scene shifts to the 1930s Paris, where the Count Basie Orchestra plays a song called "April in Paris" out of nowhere. A cowboy brings up a television sports program that had not yet been created. The last altercation completely shattered the fourth wall, plunging the audience into a cafeteria, a musical, and a Hollywood soundstage. This is not an error. It is an assertion. You should know that this is not a Western, according to Brooks. In reality, it was a Western-themed comedy. Logic, genre, time, and space were all shattered. People really enjoyed it because of that. After that, there's an implausible moment. The film opens with Count Basie and his full jazz orchestra unexpectedly appearing in the middle of a dusty desert in 1874, approximately 20 minutes into the running time. Their sharp tuxedos make them look like they belong in a concert hall, not a Wild West saloon, as they play April in Paris. Now this is where things get weird. At least as we know it today, jazz did not exist in 1874. It would be another 2 decades before jazz replaced ragtime, the predecessor of the genre. Still, they carry on as if nothing out of the ordinary is happening as they perform in the middle of the desert. Disorienting and funny all at the same, discordant with everything else. But that is the crux of it. Mel Brooks wasn't aiming for historical accuracy when he directed the film. He intended to shock the crowd by disobeying the rules. This wasn't merely a brief musical aside. It was completely disruptive to the Western plot and lasted for a few minutes. However, rather than detracting from the atmosphere, it enhanced it in some way. This scene, which showcases Brooks' fondness for ludicrous humor, went on to become one of the film's most memorable moments. And his tendency to turn the tables on cinematic conventions. Not just any version either. The one Basie played was special. His 1955 arrangement of April in Paris became legendary. Featuring Basie's signature piano rhythm, that rendition featured brass and silky swing. A staple of his live performances since its 1955 recording, it became his signature song. The 1956 Newport Jazz Festival was a watershed moment in jazz history and home to one of the most renowned performances. Another layer of meaning was added by Brooks by using that exact version. He preferred a historically significant jazz composition over an arbitrary one. It was a humorous take on real-life musical history that paid homage to Basie's legacy. The fact that Basie wasn't even acting added to the surreal nature of the scene. In his performance, he portrayed oneself. A genuine jazz great has unexpectedly appeared in the midst of a made-up 19th-century Western. Because of that decision, everything seemed even more bizarre and ingenious. The comedic effect was amplified by Basie's composed demeanor, which contrasted sharply with the chaotic environment. He appeared unperturbed. He exuded an air of natural belonging, which only added to the comedy. Participation by a globally renowned musician in such a scene is unusual, particularly without attempting to take center stage. However, that was its allure. YouTube seamlessly blended the real with the fantastic, and Basie wholeheartedly embraced the challenge. This was no ordinary case of insanity. It was Brooks who was dismantling the conventions of Western cinema. There were a lot of solemn men, dusty towns, and intense gunfights in classic Westerns, particularly those produced before 1974. They seldom enjoyed the format. However, maintaining tradition was of no concern to Brooks. The jazz scene was his most outspoken and visible attempt to shatter it. The use of a black jazz orchestra in a predominantly white Western score was, according to some academics, a daring move. Culture doesn't follow neat timelines, and it reminded audiences of that while pushing against old stereotypes. Alt out as it changes, overlaps, and even crashes into itself at times. Most readers completely overlook Blazing Saddles' other hidden secret. Even though Mel Brooks' wife and Oscar-winning actress Anne Bancroft was in it, no one paid attention to her cameo. She shied away from the spotlight despite being one of just 24 actors in history to win the Triple Crown, the Academy Award, the Emmy, and the Tony in equal measure. Subtly, she became one of the extras in the church scene. There was no major reveal, special close-up, or credit. Subtly, she disappeared. None of that was an inside joke or a publicity stunt. A subtle acknowledgement of her husband's selfless dedication to the project was all that was needed. Even fans seldom noticed the adorable little Easter egg that the cameo turned into. Bancroft and Brooks's 41-year married, playful, and fiercely loyal bond was on full display. However, despite the abundance of evidence, an anomalous occurrence occurred. The film's role was not listed by major movie databases like IMDb. A number of fans sent in screenshots. Historians have verified it. It was brought up by even Brooks. Databases still refuse to update the entry. Unofficial acknowledgement. A mini-mystery arose among movie buffs due to this minor oversight. No matter how many times people attempted to fix it, it remained unchanged. Concerned parties pointed fingers at stringent regulations regarding unrecognized contributions. Some people felt the cameo was overly subtle. Many viewers, though, saw the omission as integral to the plot. It demonstrated that even the most well-known actors can disappear from history if they opt to remain in the background. However, there are some less dramatic behind-the-scenes stories from Blazing Saddles. The audition for Madeline Kahn's part as Lily Von Stupp began with complete bewilderment. She froze in response to Mel Brooks's request to see her legs. It seemed like one of those auditions that ladies are told to skip. According to her, it's just like an audition. In a state of panic, Brooks outlined his identity in a flash. His curiosity was piqued by her ability to mimic Marlene Dietrich's dramatic chair straddle industry rides again. It was that. Just research, no sleaze. Instantly, Kahn grasped the concept. On the spot, she nailed the pose by grabbing a chair and lifting her skirt. The deal was sealed by her charisma, bravery, and comedic timing. An Oscar nomination came from that one moment and catapulted her to stardom in the film. However, her success didn't end there. Immediately following the audition, she raised her skirt once more and told Brooks not to touch her. There was no script for the line. Nothing was anticipated. It appeared out of nowhere, and it was flawless. The set became famous for that one line. It wasn't merely humorous. The entire character was defined by it. Kahn wasn't merely giving a parody performance. She served as both a boundary and the punchline, adding humor to the situation. Brooks said afterwards that he knew then and there that no one else could play Lily. It was the perfect role for her self-assurance and timing. One of the most recognizable figures in comedy history was shaped by that courageous spirit. Even Mel Brooks doubted his abilities when he began developing Blazing Saddles. Therein lay the role of Richard Pryor. It wasn't simply the writing room where Pryor was. He personified bravery in the film. At first, Mel Brooks was hesitant to use the N-word so frequently. Anxiety gripped him. Audiences might decide to leave. Would studios cancel it altogether? No flinching from Pryor. He warned Brooks that they needed to be honest about racism if they wanted to poke fun at it. Keep it firm. Ignore the mess. Make the audience feel the pain by using hate speech. A story of racial prejudice is being written, Pryor stated explicitly. Yeah, that's right. A singular term. That was the final straw. Plus, Pryor didn't lose it when he wasn't cast in the lead role. He was instrumental in deciding who would be in charge. His choice was Cleavon Little. He warned that Little, who was coal-black, would terrify the town's residents. That was the main idea. The town was meant to be frightened of a black sheriff. Because of that terror, the parody hurt. Cleavon's self-assured performance amplified the absurdity of the situation. Because of that, it was effective. Little might not have gotten the part if Pryor hadn't encouraged her. Not to mention Blazing Saddles. However, there was more than just Pryor going on behind the scenes. Gig Young, an Academy Award winner, was originally cast as the role of the Waco Kid. He was scheduled to perform an upside-down scene in a prison cell on the very first day of filming. He began to throw up uncontrollably instead. The effects of withdrawal were severe because his alcoholism had progressed over many years. Manufacturing ceased abruptly. Acting quickly was necessary for Brooks. He then replaced Young with John Wilder, who traveled across the nation to reprise the part. Young made a noise as he left. Warner Brothers was sued by him for non-payment of contract. He argued that the dismissal was unjust. The case wreaked havoc on an already chaotic production, but the worst part was yet to come. Gig Young murdered his wife and then committed suicide in 1978. His unsettling cameo on Blazing Saddles became an important but fleeting part of Hollywood history. Lastly, Hedy Lamar's lawsuit came as a surprise to everyone. Hedy Lamar was the name of the film's antagonist, who was played by Harvey Korman. The actress was clearly not pleased by the blatant pun on her name. She claimed that Warner Brothers and Brooks used her name without her consent and sued them for $10 million. A comment like, "This is 1874" was used in the film to make fun of the lawsuit. You can file a lawsuit against her. Lamar, though, was not amused. She found it insulting and unapproved. Not wanting a protracted argument, Brooks admired her. What she needed would be provided for by his lawyers, he told them. Although the exact amount was never revealed, the case served as yet another illustration of the many ways in which Blazing Saddles offended individuals, old Hollywood stars included. It didn't stop the film, though, from going down in history books. The American Film Institute's 100 Years, 100 Laughs list was published in the year 2000. The sixth-place finisher was Blazing Saddles. It triumphed over numerous other timeless classics, including Airplane and MASH. With the exception of Annie Hall and Duck Soup, only 5 films were ranked higher. The National Film Registry was then established in 2006 by the Library of Congress. There, films with significant cultural and historical value are preserved for all time. It was not only iconic, but it mattered, joining Rocky and Fargo in that regard. The film had the guts to say things no one else would have dared to, including making fun of racism and the Western genre. And its impact is felt even now. Actually, the film ignited a fresh storm in 2024. There is now a 3-minute trigger warning on HBO Max prior to the film. A message describing the usage of racist slurs and stereotypes was presented to viewers by film scholar Jacqueline Stewart. Rather than endorsing racism, she claimed the film used them to poke fun at it. The decision nevertheless prompted criticism. Some people claimed they were already well-informed. Some thought it made the show more accessible to kids. This treatment was reserved for the 2 platform films, Gone with the Wind and Blazing Saddles, that were available. What this means is that the film is still very controversial. Nothing surprised Mel Brooks. He acknowledged in an interview from 2017 that Blazing Saddles couldn't be created in the present day. No studio would even consider it. People would go balls out. His intention was not to condone hurtful humor, but he thought that risk-taking was essential to genuine comedy. It was bound to say the unthinkable. His caution pertained to art as much as censorship. He made a movie that fully embraced awkwardness because he thought laughter could neutralize hatred more effectively than any other tactic.